you must know a lot of scientists and a lot of science perspectives, science-based people whose perspective is science. What percentage would you say of the people that you know have the ability to transcend that limitation and see the context of science within a bigger picture, like you do?
Well, I'd say that it is a small minority. Now, I have had dozens and dozens of hard scientists come to my lectures and things, and mostly they're very supportive, and they get it. You know, they like what they hear. They see the bigger picture, but they're a small minority. For every one of those, there's 1,000 that, you know, wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. So it's a small minority, but I see that as changing. It's been that way since Newton, and now I think it's going to start to change more and more quickly. And the reason is we've gotten sophisticated enough with our experiments and our tools, you know, our atom snatchers and our telescopes and everything else, that we're beginning to see the details of how this reality works. And as scientists do experiments looking at these details, every month somebody sends me a paper about some scientist writing a paper and publishing in peer-reviewed science things saying, this is a virtual reality. This is, you know, we can explain this based on information and no other way. So scientists are being dragged kicking and screaming into this idea because their own experiments are telling them it's a virtual reality. Now, so you probably would find, and I'm just making this up, you know, it's not based on any kind of research or anything, but you'd probably find like 30–40% of scientists today taking virtual reality concepts seriously. You know, a decade ago, they would have laughed and, you know, passed you off as a nutcase, but now it's really it's a going thing. So you can go into big science houses like MIT and you know, Harvard, and go over to CERN and talk to those scientists, and you probably find a pretty stout minority of those say, yeah, virtual reality, that's where it's at, because that's what the data says, you see. But now what they're not seeing, and what they for now kind of refuse to look at, is what Dr. Edward Fredkin, who is also a physicist and a pretty well-known physicist and accepted, you know, he looked at virtual reality and he said that, as we just talked about earlier, that given that this is a virtual reality, then its cause has to come from outside of this virtual reality, right? The elf isn't going to find the server in his own reality. You know, the creator of the virtual reality has to be in a reality outside of the virtual reality it creates. All right, now that's just what I call third-grade logic. You know, that a simulation cannot simulate itself. You know, it has to be simulated in other obvious, trivial piece of logic. And so far, scientists are avoiding that. They don't want to look at that, because as soon as they say that, as soon as the scientists say, you know, this reality must be sourced in something outside of this reality, well, they've just left the realm of causal chain relationship. Now they sound like a preacher. Now they sound like, you know, a religious guy, right? And they don't want to go there. That's just a scary place to go, because their history tells them that that's what people thought in the bad old days when, you know, Galileo was under house arrest and Copernicus, you know, was worried about the burning stake and that kind of thing. And we don't want to go back there. So they just look the other way.
But if you go back far enough, you go back to the Greeks, they understood that. So,
yes.
You know, and these are well-educated people. I'm sure they go beyond Copernicus and go back that page. I mean, the originators of science included that perspective within. That's what science bore out of, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly. That is true. But they don't really go there so much as they just see the bad old days where belief and the woo-woo stuff, you know, was dominant, and science had a hard time trying to break through that barrier of science had to first meet religious criteria before it could move forward, and that scares them. So when they are being pushed against their will to accept this reality as being computational, as it being a virtual reality, because that's what the experiments say. On the other hand, that has a logical consequence that they really don't want to deal with, and that's that if it's virtual, it's computed in other. And other is not in this reality, and that makes us a derivative, not the main thing. There's something else, you see, that's the main thing, and that's not science. That's religion, and they don't want to go there. So that's kind of between a rock and a hard place. The rock is their own experiments that are jamming up against this hard place that says, well, if that rock's right, then, this has to be produced elsewhere in other. It's not in this reality. So I think that will only last so long. Somebody famous once said that physics changes one funeral at a time. And what they mean is that, the old guard set in their ways with their beliefs eventually get too old, they retire, they die, and new people come in who can look at a bigger picture. They don't have the same fear set. So that's why I said, back to the original question here, is that's why I say it's getting better. I see it, it's like it's been these little bubbles of enlightenment that's been off on the edges and the margins all this time. Now we've got the internet. We've got, we've got connections. Scientists are finding that virtual reality makes sense, and they can only, hold out so long from the obvious logical conclusion that it's created another. And once they do that, now science is legitimizing the concept of other. Well, now what we have to worry about is a big food fight from the religious viewpoint of who owns other. Is it a Catholic other, or is it a Baptist other, or is it a Buddhist other? Who owns other? And hopefully we won't go there. That would be devolving, back to the bad old days. I would agree, but we can see other not in that sense of religious and miracles. We can see other just in terms of consciousness is the computer, and work with a logical system and evolve that system to where it makes good sense. It's science. It just makes good scientific sense. Hopefully we'll go there, because then that's the way forward. And scientists just don't get it yet, that until they are able to step outside of this boundary they've created for themselves, they'll never solve the problem. Back in the early 1920s, we have Bohr and Heisenberg and Schrodinger, we have all these people, and they were excited about this double slit experiment. Wow, look, it's showing us reality is not at all what we thought like. Wow, we're really going to, things are going to be different now. Sort of like when Newton came up with his ideas, gravity. Wow, I can understand why, the stars move the way they do and so on. It was this big wow, and they were really excited about it. And now, almost 100 years later, it's, nobody will ever know about that. That's impossible. It's just one of those weird things. Yeah, modern physics is weird. You have to accept that. Don't ask why. So
it's too great.
Shut up and calculate. It's that kind of an attitude. So we've actually gone backwards in the 1920s, early 1900s, up to probably middle 1920s. The scientists were really excited about where this would take us. 100 years later, well, it's more like 90 years later, it's it's stiff-armed, look the other way.
Still fighting for relevance.
Yeah, nobody wants to go there. Nobody is excited about it. It's not important. It's impossible. So now they're being drugged to a place where, it's like I say, between a rock and a hard place. Somewhere along, it's going to hit the fan. They're going to have to accept what their experiments tell them. The younger people will, and it'll change. So I'm thinking in the next generation, we're going to see, a sea state change in the attitude of science toward a bigger reality. They'll have to, because they can't deny the results of their own experiments, but for so long.
Was it science that convinced you of the other, or did you approach it from trying to prove the other?
No, I approached it from the latter. When I started, I had science on this hand, and I had my experiences on the other hand. And my experiences started with transcendental meditation as a graduate student. And I found out that I could find bugs in my computer code while in a meditation state much faster and more reliable than I could poring over reams and reams of computer printout. I could just I could just watch the printouts scroll by in my mind, and the one that was bad would light up with a red light. And I look at it and read it and go find it, and sure enough, that was the problem, you see. And in the old days, you didn't have all these slick ways of finding errors. It was you're talking about thousands and thousands of punch cards, and it just was a whole different world. And finding errors was a very hard problem, and runtime was very hard to get, and it's just a different world. So that was a big thing for me, and that told me that reality is bigger than I thought. And then after that, I connected up with Bob Monroe and worked with him in his laboratory studying consciousness. And Bob taught me about out-of-body and the larger reality and how to experience it firsthand. And we did experiments with healing and other intentional things. And after a while, you get to a point where you can't deny it any longer. You just get to that point that denying is more foolish than accepting it. And then you accept it and you say, all right, how does it work? I'm still a scientist, so it's like, how does it work? But I had these two separate worlds that didn't seem to have a boundary, between them. You had science, and that was driven, by causal events, and then you had this, which is entirely subjective. But I spent the next 35 years trying to see what this subjective science, could I make it more, objective, more that I could understand how it worked, what were the boundaries, what did what to what, how did it work? And now that Bob showed me how to get in and out of that space at will, then I could do experiments there. And eventually, some 35 years later, I think I have a glimmer of maybe how it all works. So I write these 3 books called My Big Toe Trilogy, and they are books about consciousness. Basically, it's a theory of consciousness kind of thing. And after I wrote it, I was thinking about it, and I said, well, the same few principles, the same concepts that explain consciousness and my experience in the larger reality and other people's experience, the same ideas, they answer the double slit. They explain the double slit just as well. Oh, they explain, entanglement. All of these things just fell out. And then I started looking at it as the physicist rather than the consciousness researcher. And I realized that all of the big problems, what's mass, what's spin, what's space, how is it that we can, our space is expanding? Well, what's it expanding into? If the physical reality is all the reality there is, then how do you get more of it? Where's it coming from? Who's manufacturing it? How do you do that? You see, all these questions that are just kind of, we don't know, just weird science, all just kind of fell into place, and I could see all the data points just lining up with the simple idea. But no, I didn't start with it from going to science and then from science going into metaphysics. I started with it with consciousness and metaphysics, and then realized that if you understand consciousness, you understand science, because science is just a subset of a larger picture. And if you understand the superset, understanding the subset's easy. If you only understand the subset, trying to derive the superset from the subset is really hard. You see, you can't do that because the subset doesn't have enough information in it to derive its superset. So that's the way I went to it, and it surprised me as much as anybody, because I didn't realize that it would be that obvious that these same principles that describe my experiences and consciousness and so on would describe all this physics just as well. And because I was a physicist, I could make that connection. If I hadn't been a physicist, I wouldn't have had a clue that I actually had solved those problems as well. But because I did both, it just helps to do both, because I wouldn't have been so careful in my study of consciousness if I hadn't been a scientist either. It was in me that I had to do things and do statistics and control variables, and I had that mindset as a scientist. So I just kind of happily have to have both of those things that was able me to put them together.
Well, that's the pleasure of this project for me, is I get to meet archetypes. Scientists, Bruce Lipton is a fellow that's like you, has taken consciousness and made that as the basis for his understanding of his knowledge. And a fellow I just interviewed, Jose Luis Parise, is a psychoanalyst researcher. He's learned a lot from the Queros, a Peruvian tribe, about consciousness, and he's driven by that as the basis for his understanding of his field. It seems that what's lacking in people is that basis is that they put their identity onto their field, as opposed to creating their identity and then discovering what they need to discover.
Yeah.
So how does that change? I mean, it seems like the world is we're obviously heading towards a very intense something. And I think that's why there are people like you out, and I think that's why you're driven to do what you do, is because you want to turn that switch on people and get them to start to awaken that part of themselves.
Right.
How do you see the future playing out in that regard? I mean, does it work to intellectually give information, or is it something that's beyond our control that will either decide who wakes up, or who is conscious, or who is evolved consciously, or I know that sounds kind of maybe even pretentious and arrogant, but it seems to me that is the case. There are some people that are more evolved consciously than others, and they all seem to have a sense of self. Not the selfish self that you're referring to, but a sense of self as in the wonder of it all, from a sense of being a small particle in an infinite space. That paradox and that awe. So how does that get created in humanity when, like you say, you're a small percentage of the scientific community? That he's a small percentage of the psychoanalyst community. Blah blah blah.
Right. Well, there's a couple of things that have changed that will make a difference, and. Yes, it has been stuck in the margins for thousands and thousands of years, but I don't think it's going to stay stuck there that much longer. Now, what do I mean by that much longer? Is that a decade, or is that 10 decades or 20 decades? I don't know that, but I don't think it will be, in historical sense. We're on the cusp of some very big changes here. Now, one of the fundamental things that's different is before you had lots of people who would figure out some small part of the puzzle. Okay, so you have a Bruce Lipton, and he looks at biology, and he realizes that the old model just doesn't fit his results, right? And you have people that are doing that in lots of different fields. You have people walking around, and if you have a well driven, somebody will come out dowsing with a rod, to find where the water is. And yes, people snicker, but that's how they find where the water is. That's their, the geologists come out and give you some probabilities, but it's the guy out there with the stick who says, drill here, and that's where they drill, because they found out if they drill where he says to drill, they have a higher probability of hitting water. So we're on the edges of all of this, the placebo effect. That's part of our law. So we have all this, and it's worldwide now because we have a World Wide Web, but there's never been any fundamental theory that tied it all together. Why is it when Dr. Emoto freezes water, with evil thoughts, he gets blobby water and so on? Why is it that, you have the experiments in mind affecting matter, or affecting health, or raising pH in a beaker, and all these experiments that have been done for many, many years, that, their protocols are immaculate, it's good science, but there's nothing to build on. It doesn't have a foundation. It's just a statement. If you do this, that'll work. This can be done. Biology isn't dependent on, on your DNA. You can change that DNA based on what's going on in your head. You say, but there's no theory underneath of it, because physics starts at the bottom. Chemistry's built on top of physics. Biology's built on top of chemistry, and everything else is, as far as science goes, is built that way. So one of the things I bring, and my point is that I provide a fundamental basis that explains all of it. It will explain the people studying past lives. It will explain, the people who are changing the RH. It will explain Dr. Emoto's ice cubes. It will explain all of these things, then become logical consequences of a theory. And guess what? The logical consequences also explain all these physics problems. You see? So now we have a fundamental basis. We have some, instead of just saying, wow, isn't this nifty? This really works. Look at these people in their past lives. See this kid? He thought he was an airplane pilot, and he has names and plane types and all sorts of stuff that he's only 8 years old, and he wouldn't know any of that stuff. And, that's really interesting, isn't it? And people say, yeah, that's interesting, but there's no theory, you see, to say, why is that science? Why should that be that way? Why does it have to be that way? You see? So that's different, and that's just getting started. If you went out and asked randomly 1,000 scientists, about foundations under the work, they'd say there is none. And if you ask them, have you ever heard of Tom Campbell or My Big Toe, they'd probably say no. This is just in its infancy. big ideas take a long time to spread. So, but now there will be a fundamental basis, and it's not just woo-woo, it does better physics as well. So that's a sea state change. That's different. The other thing is that, as I said, scientists themselves, physicists primarily, are being shoved into this virtual reality concept. And when they do, they eventually will have to find other as the source of their virtual reality. There is no other logical choice. That's like, sailing all the way around the world and coming up on the other side like Magellan did and then claiming it's still flat. You just can't do that. You're stuck with its round, you see. So they're being stuck now, which means it won't be that much longer before the new, less belief-based scientists will start to make that turn. Well, the scientists, I call them the high priests of, our modern society. It used to be that the high priests of our society were religious. The high priests are the people who tell us what to believe. They tell us what's true, and we depend on them. And when science says this is the way it is, then particularly in the West, but all over the world, we say, yeah, must be. That's true, because science just tells us the way it is. They're our high priests that tell us what to believe. And when the scientists say, we actually must be derived out of someplace other that's not in this reality frame, it's outside of our universe, and it's non-physical. So when they say that, then that will be true, because the scientists have said it. And what's that's true, that's different now. All of these isms and all of the philosophy and all of the theology and all the rest of it is just based on, again, if you do this, this kind of happens, and this makes sense. There's little pockets of things, but there's no scientific foundation on them. Now there will be. There'll be a scientific foundation about what's other. How does it work? Why is it there? What's our relationship to it? You see, now there's a scientific foundation under that. That will make a big difference. So I see there's just a couple of big paradigm shifts. We're getting to the first one very quickly, and that is this is a virtual reality. The second one will be it's created in other. The third one will be consciousness is the computer. Consciousness is an information, an information field. It is the computer. And then after that, it will be the point of consciousness is to evolve, and evolving means moving toward love. That's the point of the whole thing. So there's a bunch of paradigm shifts that in a row, it's going to go bing, 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 but each one is a logical consequence of the other. If you say that consciousness is a computer, then you have to it's just science that says computer is an information system. Information systems, survive by lowering entropy. I mean, that's just basic information science. That's the way it is. And in this kind of a social system, lowering entropy is cooperative, not at odds. So, I mean, that's just easy. So I think all these things will fall, but you have to get one and then the next and then the next. So there's 4 or 5 of these paradigm shifts that we'll have to get through, but I see it as being inevitable. The scientists whose science is telling them that this is a virtual reality can only stiff arm the it's in other for so long. You see, they're not going to win that because logic is not on their side. There, the idea that it's in other is logic. That's better science. So better science will prevail eventually, and the truth will come out. And I think all those things will get to them. So we didn't have that path before. So now we kind of have a path forward that didn't exist before now. We've got a fundamental scientific physics-based logic that supports all of the stuff that the parapsychologists and other thinkers have been toying with for the last 4,000 years. And now it's not paranormal, it's normal. You just have a bigger picture of what reality is, and suddenly all that just becomes normal and understandable. So all these different people that you're talking to and interviewing and the pieces of the puzzle that they've solved, they don't know it yet, but there's a basic physics foundation that's been built underneath what they've discovered that makes it science, not just, wow, look, we have this neat thing that we figured out and it makes good sense, kind of stand alone in its little bubble by itself, but now it's got this scientific foundation under it. So, well, of course, it has to be that way. Couldn't be any other way. You see? So that's new. And because that's new, ideas take a long time, and they have to be vetted, and that's as they should be. It takes time, and these kind of big changes, particularly where science doesn't really want to go there because they kind of lose control. As soon as they say it happens in other, well, the next step in science is not causal change. You see, they just kind of reach the end of their road, and now somebody else take it from here. You see, so they don't really want to go there because that's not what they do, and they don't define that as science, so they turn away from it, refuse to look at it, don't read it, aren't concerned with it. But that will change. It has to, because they're being shoved by their own work. So yes, I see a lot of change coming, and I think now you're going to see these dominoes, these flip, 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 and once it starts to go, I think it'll go rather quickly, because the big one is going to be the scientists, making the statement that virtual reality can't compute itself; it has to be computed another, like Fredkin said. And once that becomes an established thing, the rest of it's going to fall out quickly. If we can avoid going backwards and de-evolving into high entropy, crud, then I think our path forward should be pretty obvious and move along pretty quickly. So I have great hopes and prospects for the future, because we have something now that we never had before. We've got an internet. We're all connected. You and I are talking about this. That never would have happened before. I just would have been some crazy old physicist, that lived on a mountain someplace that had these strange ideas, and it would have been hard for that to go anywhere. But it's the right time and the right place for all of it to come together. And now, you'll tell people, and those people will tell people, and it will work its way to where it ought to be. And we've got the infrastructure.
And it's a physical manifestation of exactly what you're talking about, right?
Exactly.
A computer data connected consciousness.
Yes.
I mean, we're living out what's going on underneath it all.
Yeah, as someone said, as below, so above, as above, so below, but the other, my take on that is that this is a process fractal, the process of evolution, and what evolution works on is consciousness. And this is, a fractal just repeats itself. So what comes out of the evolution output goes back into its input, which then makes new output, which goes back into its input. So evolution works the same. So if you look at the evolution of the larger conscious system, it's a parallel in the same sort of steps as the evolution of the cells up through biology. You see, it's just the same sort of thing. And the evolution of technology and the evolution of, monetary systems or anything else. All these systems evolve. And in science, we realize that when we make these big leaps forward in understanding, the old way of doing things, the old thoughts, it's not that we throw them out and say, oh, they're wrong, they're bad. We realize that they work, and they work just fine within a specific region. So the flat Earth, not a bad model for short distances. Flat Earth is good. All the surveyors that are out there surveying, your building lot have a flat Earth model. That's what they work on. They don't work on curved surfaces. They work on flat Earth. So if you have a hill, they measure straight out for your acreage. They don't measure down that hill. It's all flat Earth. Well, that's good approximation. Is it right? No, but it's wrong in the 10th decimal place, and who cares, right? About a 1,000th of a square inch of property, just isn't important. So it's like that. In Newtonian physics, it just became, well, if it's not too small, it's not too fast. Newtonian physics is really good physics. It just works in this area. And now we're finding that relativity and quantum mechanics and this whole physical reality, that's just a subset of a bigger picture, and it works really good in this area where the uncertainty isn't too big. You see? So it's like that. As everything expands, the old, it doesn't get tossed out. You just realize it's a subset. It's not the biggest picture. And the way you know it's not the biggest picture is because you have a lot of stuff that just doesn't make sense. It's weird physics, we just won't know. It's because you have, what is mass? What is space? What is spin? What is charge? Where does it come from? Nobody knows. Well, that tells you we don't have the bigger picture. You see, we have the smaller picture because you got every time you get to something fundamental, you don't know what it is. That's telling you don't have the big picture. So I think we're getting there, and we have a big picture now that we can look at. So I see the next generation, the next 25 or 30 years, I expect a lot of change. And I think people have an intuitive sense of that. They may not know how it's going to change or the way it'll come down. You know, I think it's going to first be the physicists that lead the parade by coming to virtual reality and then coming to, you know, eventually consciousness is the computer. I think that's the route it'll go because they are the high priests of our culture, and the culture will not say, yes, this is true or yes, this is likely until our high priest verify it and vet it first. So I think that's the key. We have to bring them along until they get it or they get drugged kicking and screaming, you know, into the future, whatever. But that's where it'll start. And then once it starts, it's going to be a snowball rolling downhill and the rest of it will go. And people have this intuitive sense that something's in the air, something's happening. There's a quickening. There's just, you know, and it is. And that's why. I think from what I've explained, that's why it's quickening. And over the next couple of decades, we're going to see a massive shift in our understanding of the nature of reality. And when we do, paranormal is just normal. You know, impossible physics isn't impossible at all. It just makes good sense. And we will realize that love is the answer. You know, that's really what we're about. And growing up, once you understand that, talking about the intellect leading the growth, well, yes, it does have to happen at the being level, as you were saying. Some people are more grown than others. It just has to be at that being level, and you can't rush the growth process. It has to not happen from the outside in, but from the inside out. But the intellect can show the direction, can show the way, can show the reason why this is, you know, why this makes sense. And once people understand how the game's played, it's a lot easier for them to become better players. You see, as long as you have no idea what the hell is this life game all about, all of us are wandering around here clueless and have no idea what it's about and what we ought to be doing or anything, well, you don't get a lot of growth that way. But once they say, oh, I see it, it makes sense. My experience now, I can put it in context that's scientific. The high priests have said, this is valid. I see my life now and all of my experiences, a lot of the ones I never talked about to anybody, you know, now they all sort of make sense to me. And once you get that, then you get the other logical derivative that says love is the answer. That's where we're going. That's why we're here. That's the point. And now we have a bunch of players who know what the game is. Sure, there'll still be people trying to take advantage of everyone else, but they're going to be fewer and fewer and fewer. Institutions will change. Governments will change. Money systems will change. All sorts of things will change to reflect the attitudes of the people. We don't need to have a bunch of rebels go cut off the heads of the evil people of the world that are making life hard for all of us. You know, that will all just change. Once we change, that stuff will all change itself. It'll be easy. So I think that's where it's going, and I believe that we are in a century that'll see it come and become, it'll be done in this century, maybe even as early as the next 20 or 30 years. Hard to say.
So if you could give a message to humanity, what would you say to people?
Well, first, I would say to you, and in our discussion, I would say that all of this theory is great, but what's really important to people is their life. You know, everyday life. Somebody has a good question when they say, yeah, but what does this have to do with me? Okay, virtual realities, double slit experience. What does this have to do with me? How does it affect my life? And because consciousness is fundamental to everything, including your life, it does affect your life. So just talking to people, I wouldn't tell them about the science and about the grand theory of everything or any of that. That's really beside the point. That's working away, with the high priest. That's working away inside the culture, and that'll follow its own path. The thing that's important here for you to understand is that you are an individuated unit of consciousness, and you are here to grow up. That's your mission. That's why you're here. And the way you do that is to get rid of your fear, your ego, and instead you have cooperation, caring. You change your intent from about yourself to an intention about how can you be helpful, useful, and be part of the solution, with other people. It's not about you. Now, how do you go about doing that? Well, that's a nice theory, right? Love and peace. Everybody, well, that's not a real big deal in people's lives either. They say, yeah, but what do I do? Well, what I tell them to do is if there's any part of your life that isn't full of joy and satisfaction, which that means for most people, most of their life, if there's any time that you feel stressed, angry, upset, anxious, any of those kinds of feelings, hurt, all of those negative feelings that you feel are related, can be related to a fear. You feel those because of your fear. It's your fear. I know people say, oh, so-and-so made me angry. Well, so-and-so doesn't make you angry. You choose to be angry. Step one is take responsibility for yourself and who you are and what you are. You choose to be angry. You could just, pass it off. You could, smile and say something that would maybe diffuse that anger in the other person. You could do other things. You have other choices. But why do you make the choice you have? Because you're fearful. You're fearful, and the fear creates the ego, and it's about you, and how dare they say that to me, you see, instead of concern about, why is that person so upset? Maybe I should, approach this differently, or help them see a bigger picture, or just leave now and let the situation cool down something. But being angry isn't going to help the situation at all. If you see it, if it's your fear creating the ego that creates your dissatisfaction, that's the source of most of your pain. That's what makes you unhappy. That's what makes your life unfulfilling. That's why you seem like you're on a treadmill and can't get off, because you don't understand that what it is you're here for is to grow up, to evolve. So how do you go about that? First, be aware of these uncomfortable, negative things going on in your life. Trace them back to the fear. Why does that make you angry? Well, it's because I'm afraid that people won't take me seriously. That person wasn't taking me seriously. They weren't listening. Well, why are you afraid that people won't take you seriously? You'll get back to a fear that basically will find some, I'm fearful that I'm not competent. I'm fearful that I'm not lovable. I'm fearful that, I can't make it, that people won't pay attention to me, and I need to be paid attention to, because if I fear I'm inadequate, then people paying attention to me helps erase that fear, and now I feel less fearful. So it's because of the fear that makes me get upset when somebody indicates I'm inadequate. So you get that back, and then once you find the fear, there's only one antidote to fear, and that's courage. You have to have the courage to accept that fear. First of all, be authentic and say, all right, that's me. I have that fear, and that's affecting. I'm acting out that fear in my life, and that's not helpful for me. That hurts me. That's causing me and others around me pain. I need to get rid of that fear. Well, the way you get rid of it is you have the courage to accept it. Say, okay, I'll accept it. If I have afraid of being, not secure, people won't like me, I'll accept that. I'm just going to be me. I'm going to act like me, and if people don't like me, I'll accept that. If I end up, alone someplace, away from everybody because nobody likes me, then I'll accept that. But at least I will be myself, and then from there I can grow. I can change. I can become something else. But first I'm going to own me. That's where the courage comes. You have to own yourself, accept it, and say, all right, fear, give it your best shot. I accept whatever you're going to do. I'll be that, and then I'll work on that. And once you've accepted the result that the fear that you're afraid of, the fear has no more teeth. If you've accepted that you're insignificant, and you've accepted that, and that's okay, then fear of being insignificant no longer can bite, because you've already accepted that that's the way it is. And you'll find out that all of these fears are paper tigers. They don't really exist. They're only in your mind. There's nothing really there but smoke, you see. That's what I mean by paper tiger. It's just not there. So when you find that fear and you have the courage to be it, own it, and then witness it, feel it, experience it, and then change it if you don't like it. Or if you do like it, hang on to it. If whatever you're doing is good, be authentic. And as you're authentic, start looking at the feedback you're getting. How's it working? How are you relating in the world? How's your job going? How's your marriage going? How are your kids doing? How are people relating to you? And if the feedback isn't good, then you start looking for another fear. You start looking for problems. So that's what you do. And yes, the first fear that you get rid of is the hardest. That may take you 6 months or a year to beat that first fear. The next one is only half as hard, and the next one's half as hard as that. And after you've done 4 or 5 of them, you're knocking them down really quickly because now you know they're paper tigers, and they just don't scare you so much anymore. So it gets to be easier and easier and easier, and your life gets better and better, and you become more effective, and people listen to you. Your boss likes you better. Your work is better. Your kids like you better. Your wife likes you better. Your husband likes you better. Everything starts to get better. And then that is the positive feedback you need to keep working the process. One fear at a time, and you just beat them. So what would I tell the readers to do? The change in the world you'd like to see. What did Gandhi say? Be the change that you'd like to see in the world. He hit it right on the head. That's it. So change yourself. It's getting rid of that fear. If you do that, that will be your maximum contribution to making this world a better place. So rather than go out and, beat the bad guys and, off with their heads, change yourself. Fix your own head and let that be an example to other people. An example. If you go out and preach and tell other people what they need to do, that won't help at all. You just have to let them do it, that you can be an example. And if asked, you can explain. If not asked, you might try to explain gently, but don't push. You see? So that's what I'd say to do. Understand the game. What's going on here? What are you supposed to be doing? If you're not happy, you've probably made that situation. We create our own reality. You can change that by changing yourself, not by changing others. We've got that idea. I'm unhappy because of you and you and you and you. And if I could just change you guys, I'd be happy. You wouldn't. That's like I'd be happy if I had $1 million. Well, go follow the results of people that suddenly get rich, and you'll find it doesn't make them very happy. Matter of fact, it makes more of them miserable than it makes them happy. So it's not changing those other people that would make you happy. It's you that choose to be unhappy relative to the things and the way you relate to those other people. Change you, not them. You see, they'll change on their own, just like the president or the social system, the money system. That'll change when we change. Well, so will all these relationships change when you change. You see, and you can be a source of change then in your environment. So that's what I'd say to do. That's the key thing. Don't go, yes, go ahead, go out and change the world. Fine. I'm not saying sit at home, and ignore everything. You are integrated into this reality. The choices you make are important. Yes, do go change the world, but realize that the changes you make are going to be superficial. They're going to be changes not that are fundamental, but changes that make everybody happier. Maybe they make the world more civilized, but they're not really getting us where we need to go unless you change yourself first. So I don't discourage anybody from going out and changing the world. Have at it, but be gentle and be courteous and be kind when you do that. Do it in a positive way. If you go out with hate, if you hate those people and you're going to fix them, you're just part of the problem. I don't care what side you're on, you're part of the problem. That isn't going to work. You got to go out there with love and with caring and with that sort of an approach. Otherwise, you're just making things worse. You're pouring gasoline on a fire if you go out there with you're going to get those jerks and those people that are making all these terrible decisions and ripping us all off. And that kind of attitude does not help. That's an attitude that's in the wrong direction. That'll just make everything worse. It'll make those guys more jerks and make you a jerk. It just runs downhill from that. You've got to go out with love in your heart and caring, and you care about making things better. That's good. Keep it positive. Grow up yourself, and you will have optimized your contribution to the larger consciousness system, and that's really what it's all about. So that's what I would say. Too much of our time and energy is spent on trying to manipulate the future. Well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to say that because that'll make these people do this and that. And we're constantly planning and manipulating things to come out the way we know is right. We know it's best, and we know it's good for those people if they just do what we said. And we're trying to manipulate everything up here so it works out the way we want it to work out. And we spend very little attention on our intention for the choices we're making. See, we blame everything on what's outside of us, and we fix everything by fixing what's outside of us. And really, we need to spend that focus on what's inside of us and what our choices are and why we're making those choices. And what does that say about us and our fear, and how can we get rid of that fear and become better people? So instead of manipulating the front end, we need to look at the middle here and say, what choices do I have? How could I act? Okay, I can be angry. I can be upset. I can beat my child, for doing what I said not to, whatever. But will that help? Is that really going to help in the long run? Is this positive? Are we going in the right direction? And why am I doing this? Where's the fear? Where's the ego? Is it about me or is it about them? And you ask these questions, and that's going to be your source of growing up. Because now you're actually making an effort to grow up. And if you make an effort, it'll happen. It's just that simple. If you continue to make an effort, it will continue to happen, and you will grow up. So it's not as hard as it seems, and the hardest part is in the beginning. Focus on your intents, and don't blame everything on everybody else and everything, and woe is me, and that is just self-destructive. It's got to be. You have to live your reality, not try to manipulate it. Live it. Make choices. Be aware of your choices. So that's what I would tell people, because now that's not about theory. That's not physics. That's not the grand plan. That's not the paradigms that have to shift, because all of that stuff is good to know. It kind of gives us a sense of what's going on in the bigger world and how and why and how we're a part of it, because all this individuals is what's going to make it when we get to that point where the sciences say, other is where we come from and so on. That's what's going to keep us from going into this big religious wars about who owns other. It's going to be the quality of the people here. The quality of the people here are low. That's what we'll do. We'll start fighting each other over ownership of other. And that will just put us backwards, I don't know, 100 years, 10 years, hard to say, you see. But it's this quality of the individuals is what prevents that. So, yeah, the big picture's nice. And it's good intellectual candy to work on and understand how you fit into it. But the real rubber meets the road right inside your own head with your choices. Because you are consciousness. Your mission is to grow up and become love. And if you succeed at that, you'll have done, you'll have done optimal for your contribution. You'll be part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
If after I go through all this, because you went through a lot of information here, if I come up with some more ways of drawing more bits of knowledge out of you, can I contact you again for another interview?
Sure. If the time we spend ends up helping people, and the more people the better, that's what I'm about.
That's what I'm about too.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Yeah. So long. We'll do it again.
Okay. Thank you.